Welcome back, everyone. It's just after 10 p.m., and you're tuned in to your favorite corner of the airwaves, Late Night Pulse, where we keep you company through the quiet hours. Lines are open if you want to chat, request a song, or confess something weird about your day. Let's see. First up, we've got Mark from Route 19. Mark, you're live. Oh, hey, yeah. Can you play something classic? Maybe some Fleetwood Mac? Fleetwood Mac? Solid choice. Sorry about that. Seems like the signal's acting up tonight. Bit of a storm rolling through, maybe. Always happens when the air's thick like this. No worries, folks. We'll push through. As I was saying, Fleetwood Mac's up next. But if you've got something stranger to share tonight, the phone lines are hungry. Tell me something eerie, something impossible, or just something you need to get off your chest. After all, it's the late shift. And this is where the weirdness comes out to play. Hold on, there it is again. That's static. You hear it, right? That's not your imagination. It's like voices, layered underneath the crackle, garbled. Could be bleed through from another station, but it doesn't sound like a station. More like whispers. And it's shifting, like it's moving through the signal itself. I've been doing this show for years. And yeah, weird stuff happens when the weather gets jumpy. Solar flares, interference. Radio's a temperamental beast. But this has a texture to it. Like something's breathing through the static. Hang tight. I'm running a manual sweep on the frequencies. Maybe a ham operator messing around? Or maybe the lights flicker. Okay, that's new. If you're hearing this too, if your radios are acting up, call me. This station isn't haunted. Not yet anyway, but something's trying to get through. And I want to know if you hear it too. Line 1's blinking. Let's find out who's up this late. Caller, you're live? What's on your mind? Yeah. I need to know if anyone else is seeing this. I'm out near the old Miller farm, and there's something running through the fields. Okay. What kind of something? Coyote? Bear? Number. No, this thing's huge. I saw it clear as day. Under the floodlights. Long tail. Too long. And the way it moves, it's not running, it's hunting. Hunting what, exactly? My cows. They're gone. All of them. The fence is shredded like paper. Okay, slow down. You're saying something big enough to take out an entire herd just... What? Appeared? Any prints? Any sound? The sound, that's why I called. It was like a growl, but lower, heavier, like a giant breathing through a broken pipe. You're sure this isn't some kind of prank? Prank? I'm watching it right now. It's standing at the edge of my yard, staring. It knows I'm calling you. He hung up. Just like that. Okay, listeners, if you're out near Miller Farm, call me back. Because either this guy's seeing ghosts or something's out there. Okay, let's not jump to conclusions. Rural legends are born in calls like that. Maybe it's a prankster in a rubber suit. Maybe it's just shadows playing tricks on tired eyes. Except the phones won't stop ringing. Line 2, another caller from upstate, reporting clawed tracks cutting across their property. Line 3, somebody swearing they saw a massive shadow near the county reservoir. Every caller sounds the same. Breathless, shaky, stuck halfway between disbelief and terror. Whatever's happening, it's moving fast. Reports spread outward like a stain. Farms, suburbs, even the highway. Truckers radioing in about something pacing them along the tree line, too fast for any animal they know. And the noise, every single one mentions the same sound. That deep, guttural growl threaded with something metallic like rust-scraping bone. Still think it's a hoax? I'd love to say yes, but my switchboard says otherwise. This station's been here 50 years, and I've never seen a call surge like this. Not even during the tornado back in '93. I don't know what's out there, but I know this. Something's coming. And if you're listening, lock your doors. Would you like me to continue and write the next section, the first wave, welcome to prehistoric Earth, in the same immersive, suspenseful style? Line 4, go ahead, you're live. Please, please tell me someone else heard that. It was right outside my window. I swear to God, I'm not crazy. What did you hear? It wasn't just a sound. It was like the whole air shook around it, like something massive was breathing down my neck. Okay, what kind of sound are we talking about? A plane? An explosion? No, this was alive. It was deep, low, like metal grinding underwater. But there was a voice inside it. I can't explain it. It wasn't human, but it knew we were listening. Hold on, I'm getting another call. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone, please. And then it happens. The roar comes through the radio itself. Not a recording, not a caller. Live crackling through my headphones, shaking the walls like a heartbeat. Big enough to swallow the sky. All calls drop at once. The roar fades into static, and before I can even process what just happened, the emergency alert system hijacks the frequency. This is a national emergency alert. Stay indoors. Avoid open areas. Shelter in place immediately. That's all it says. Over and over, like a warning someone pre-recorded, but never expected to play. No explanation, no cause. Just that robotic voice, calm and hollow, telling us to hide from something we still can't see. The switchboard lights flicker back to life. Callers screaming, begging to know what's happening. But the only answer I have is that roar still ringing in my ears, and the terrifying realization that whatever's out there isn't hiding anymore. The emergency broadcast ends, but the silence barely lasts 2 seconds before the phone lines explode. Every button lights up. More than I've ever seen. More than we even have capacity for. I grab the first call I can. "Something killed my horses," the caller blurts out, voice trembling so hard I can barely understand him. "They're not just dead. They're torn apart, like something didn't even eat them, just shredded them for fun." Before I can answer, line 2 cuts in, overlapping his voice. "We saw it, me and my brother. We saw it running past the barn. Too big for a bear, too low to be a moose. It screamed. The kind of scream that doesn't belong in this century." Line 3 breaks through next. A woman sobbing, barely able to speak. "There's claw marks all over the side of my house. Not scratches, deep grooves. Like something was testing the walls, seeing if it could break through." One caller after another, all overlapping, all describing the same thing. Animals gutted, clawed tracks carved into the earth. And that sound, the scream, the unnatural screech slicing through the night air like teeth on glass. I'm trying to keep them talking, trying to piece together what's happening, but the more they describe, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just one town or one region. This is spreading. And with every call, the fear in their voices turns from confusion to resignation, as if some ancient memory buried deep inside their bones already knows what's hunting them. The flood of ground-level reports is terrifying enough, but then the first pilot breaks silence on the emergency frequency. His voice cuts through the noise like a blade, tight, clipped, barely holding itself together. "We've got unidentifieds on radar, large, fast, irregular flight patterns. No transponders, no radio contact. They're too big to be birds, but they're moving like a flock." Another voice jumps in, an air traffic controller out of Albany. "Same here. We're seeing it too. Moving east, low over the tree line, wingspans bigger than any migratory species we've ever tracked." They're describing shapes, dark swarms blotting out their instruments. Not drones, not planes. Something alive, something prehistoric, tearing through modern skies like it owns them. I read back the reports live on air, my hands shaking so badly the mic crackles against my fingers. Pterosaurs, the scientists would later call them. But right now, the word itself feels impossible. Like saying ghosts or dragons or monsters under the bed. But the callers aren't just seeing them, they're hearing them. Massive wings slicing defeat through the air, low guttural screeches mixing with that metallic howl we first heard through the static. Something ancient has stepped into the present, and it isn't waiting for permission. The phones keep ringing, and somewhere between the terror and disbelief, a new kind of silence takes over. The silence of people realizing they've woken up in a world they don't understand anymore. And then, like adding gasoline to a bonfire, the official messages start rolling in. First from state emergency management, telling people to stay indoors, lock their doors, and wait for further updates. But within minutes, another alert hits. This one from a county sheriff's office, urging everyone to evacuate immediately. No explanation, just pure panic in text form, like someone smashing the send button without thinking. I read both messages live, trying to make sense of the contradiction. Stay or run. Which is it? The callers don't know either, and the confusion spreads faster than the fear. One man insists his neighborhood's already deserted, while another swears the highway's gridlocked with people trying to escape. Some towns declare curfews, others abandon law and order entirely. In less than an hour, every piece of leadership fractures, and the people left listening to this broadcast are left to make their own rules. Some stay, barricading themselves into basements and bathrooms, holding kitchen knives against threats science never prepared them for. Others flee into the night, headlights slicing through ancient fog, not knowing if they're driving toward safety or straight into the jaws of whatever came back. Every official update contradicts the last. Every emergency number rings endlessly, no answers. It's not just fear anymore. It's the total collapse of authority. When the voices that are supposed to guide you have nothing left to say, all you're left with is the sound of your own breathing and the roars outside your window. The confusion was bad enough. Contradicting orders, broken emergency lines, neighbors arguing over whether to hide or run, but all of that ended the moment the video hit. It started with a local dad in Willow Creek, just trying to figure out what was triggering his backyard motion sensor. He didn't find out until the security cam footage uploaded automatically to his cloud. Within minutes, someone leaked it, and then it spread faster than the warnings themselves. I've seen the clip. I've played it on this broadcast twice now, and I still don't believe what I'm looking at. It shows the backyard first. Normal, quiet. A child's plastic slide, a half-empty kiddie pool, one porch light flickering against the mist. But then it moves, something low to the ground. Fast, almost twitching as it walks. Its head snaps toward the camera like it knows it's being watched. A velociraptor. Not a fossil, not a reconstruction. A living, breathing predator in a suburban backyard, sniffing at the windows like it remembers what human houses smell like. The detail is too perfect for CGI. The fear in that father's voice when he called this station, too raw for a prank. And the way it moved, like it had always been here. Like the last 65 million years were just an inconvenient nap. The video pulled the rug out from under the whole country. People still believed the government could explain this, still clung to the hope that this was some elaborate joke gone wrong. But you don't fake that kind of hunger in an animal's eyes. Every call after that changed. No more questions about whether it was real. Now, they just wanted to know how much time they had left. The video rewired every station overnight. We weren't talk radio anymore. We were lifelines. And just when it felt like the broadcast couldn't get darker, we patched into our field reporter, Melissa Farrow, live from a small town about 50 miles north of here. She's calm at first. Too calm, like she's talking around the fear, holding her breath between sentences. She says the streets are abandoned, but the houses are full. Curtains twitch when she walks by, people peeking out for a second before hiding again. No kids playing, no dogs barking, just silence, except for the sounds underneath. She holds the mic out, lets us all hear it. Footsteps, the heavy, scraping kind that doesn't belong to a human gait. Breathing, deep, slow, too deliberate. And then that same metallic growl we first heard over the static. Louder now, closer. She keeps talking, but her voice cracks. I'm standing in front of what used to be the library. There's a car flipped over in the parking lot. Blood on the windshield. Something moved inside the building. I can't tell if it's human. She doesn't want to go in, but she does. We hear the door creak open, glass crunching under her shoes, her breath catching in her throat every few steps. She whispers descriptions, claw marks through drywall, overturned shelves. Something massive pushed against the back door, as if it tried to escape from the inside. And then the sound, a low snarl followed by a single sharp inhale like a predator, discovering fresh prey. She starts running. We can hear it through the mic, the ragged panic in her breath, her shoes slapping against concrete, doors slamming open, then shut. She's crying, but trying not to, whispering prayers between gasps. And the footsteps behind her, faster, heavier, gaining ground. The last thing we hear is her scream. One sharp cry, cut short by a wet bone-snapping crunch, then silence, for 7 whole seconds. And after that, nothing but static. It's been hours since Melissa's scream cut off the line. Since then, the phones haven't stopped, but the voices on the other end don't sound the same anymore. They're broken. Some callers beg, pleading for updates I don't have. Desperate to know if the military's coming, if anyone knows what's happening. They ask me to tell them something comforting. Anything, but the only thing I can tell them is I'm still here. And that's starting to feel like a lie. Others are too far gone to make sense of. One man keeps repeating a single word, teeth, like his mind caught on a loop and never found its way out. Another woman whispers, breathless, asking if I can hear them breathing too, insisting something, is standing outside her window watching, waiting for her to speak loud enough to break the glass. Even the silence between calls feels wrong now, like the air itself is listening. And under all of it, under the static, under the panic, there's that sound again. That low metallic pulse, always hiding at the edges of the frequency. It's everywhere now. No matter how many times we reset the equipment, it's like the whole world is breathing in time with something older than the world itself. The phones keep ringing. I keep answering. But I'm not sure who's holding who together anymore. Me holding the callers or the callers holding me. Somewhere along the way, the panic turned into argument. I barely have to ask for opinions anymore. Callers are fighting each other live on air, each convinced they know the truth, and each truth sounds worse than the last. It's a biological attack, one caller says, his voice trembling but defiant. Someone's weaponized ancient DNA, some rogue nation trying to play God, and now we're paying the price. It's a hoax, another interrupts, shouting over him. Some viral marketing stunt gone nuclear. Just wait, some movie studio is going to take credit for all this. You'll see. And then the religious calls begin. One after another, scripture in their mouths and terror in their voices. A preacher warns that this is the unsealing of the earth, that the ancient beasts have been released from their graves to reclaim a world that was never ours to keep. Another insists the dinosaurs were never extinct at all, that they've been waiting beneath the earth, sealed away until humanity's arrogance called them back. Every theory sounds impossible. Every theory sounds right. And the arguing keeps the fear alive, like they're too terrified to let the silence settle in. Because silence means accepting the truth that whatever's happening, it's bigger than hoaxes, wars, or religion. It's something we can't explain. And that's always the fear that breaks people fastest. Then the calls shift again. The arguing dies down, and something worse takes its place. The survivor stories. A man whispers into the line, voice so quiet I have to turn the gain up just to hear him. He's barricaded himself inside a gas station, shelves stacked against the doors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Outside, he says, they circle the pumps, smelling the fuel, snapping at the glass, leaving streaks of blood and oil smeared across the windows. He hasn't seen another person in hours. The last customer who came through didn't make it out of the lot. The man says he can still hear bones cracking somewhere nearby, and he's too afraid to look out and see what's doing the chewing. Then there's the mother calling from her basement, whispering so softly I can barely catch her words. She and her 2 kids have been hiding in the root cellar since the first roar shook the house. She ran out of food yesterday, but she's afraid to leave. She says they heard footsteps above them last night. Too heavy for a person, too slow for a deer. And when her youngest coughed, everything outside the door went silent. She says they're praying now, not because they expect rescue, but because prayers are quieter than screams. One by one, the calls keep coming, each more hopeless than the last. Families sleeping in bathtubs, hoping the porcelain walls might somehow keep the monsters out. A trucker hiding inside his rig, shotgun across his lap, knowing it won't matter if they decide metal's not enough to stop them. Each voice carries the same weight. Not just fear, but the certainty that survival isn't a goal anymore. It's a delay. Nothing more. The phones are still ringing, but now it's different. It's no longer about information. No one's asking for updates or plans or guidance. They're just unraveling. Live on the air. The first one starts laughing. A high, thin sound, barely human, choking between gasps. I ask his name, but he can't stop. He just keeps laughing until it turns into a scream without air, and then the line dies. The next voice is crying. No words, just that deep, helpless sobbing you only hear from someone who's already accepted they won't survive the night. I try to talk to her, tell her she's not alone, but all she says is, I can hear them under the floor. Before the call goes silent, another caller doesn't cry, doesn't laugh, just starts praying. Not quietly, not calmly. He's shouting scripture over the static, voice cracking with desperation. It's not a prayer for salvation. It's a bargain. Something ancient is listening, and he's begging for terms. This isn't panic anymore. This is what comes after. When the mind realizes there's no logic left to cling to, when survival shifts from action to ritual, laughter to block the fear, tears to drown it, prayers to surrender to it, I keep taking the calls because that's my job. But every time I press the button, I wonder if I'm hearing the last words these people will ever say. And between the prayers, the sobs, the broken laughter, there's a new kind of silence building. Not just fear of what's outside, but fear of what's happening inside their own heads. Then, just as I think nothing could shake me more, the last call of the hour comes in. It's a man. His voice thin and shaken, but clear. He says he's been watching from his attic window for the last hour. Not moving, not speaking, just watching. He says the dinosaurs, they're not alone. There are figures moving alongside them, human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too thin, their skin the color of smoke, faces stretched like they forgot how to wear them. They walk beside the beasts, not afraid, not hunted, leading them. I ask him to describe them again, but his voice cracks into a whisper. They're not coming for my house, he says. They're coming for yours. The line goes dead. And for the first time tonight, I realize the roar I've been hearing through the static isn't alone. There's something walking with it. After everything, after the roars, the calls, the screams caught live on air, I thought the government would step up, that someone with authority would take the wheel and tell us what the hell is happening. Instead, they gave us a press conference, a spokesperson, calm, polished, wearing that disaster-proof smile, stood behind a podium and said it was mass hysteria. They blamed viral hoaxes, saying the videos were fakes stitched together with AI. They claimed the screams on air were prank calls and the sightings, overactive imaginations triggered by online fear-mongering. I replayed their statement live, so every listener could hear the lies for themselves. And you could feel the anger through the phones. These weren't theories or distant headlines anymore. This was blood on their doorsteps, claw marks on their walls, roars shaking their windows, and they were being told to calm down and log off. Even as they spoke, more calls flooded in. Reports of livestock torn apart, power grids failing, entire neighborhoods going dark. But the officials stayed the course, doubling down on their script, clinging to it like a life raft in a sea they no longer understood. And beneath the polished denial, you could hear it, the cracks in their voices, the subtle tremor under the calm. Because they know. Whatever this is, it's bigger than protocols, bigger than press releases. They're not lying because they want to. They're lying because they're just as scared as we are. Minutes after the press conference, the real story started leaking in. Not from officials, but from the people on the ground. Callers from every rural corner of the state said the same thing. Military convoys speeding down back roads, cutting through neighborhoods like they were in a race against time. No sirens, no announcements, just columns of trucks and armored vehicles heading toward forests, wildlife reserves, and national parks. What's in the parks? No one knows, but whatever escaped those places isn't going back quietly. A trucker broke in on the emergency channel, voice shaking so badly I could hear his teeth clicking together. He said he'd passed a convoy sitting in dead silence, headlights off, soldiers just standing by their vehicles like they were waiting for something to come to them. He said one of them looked right at him, held a finger to his lips. A warning, not a greeting. And that's when he saw it. Something massive moving in the tree line, its outline just barely visible between the trunks, not hiding, stalking. I asked if the soldiers opened fire if there was any sign of a fight. But the answer chilled me more than gunfire ever could. No, he said. They didn't raise their weapons. They just stood there, like they knew shooting wouldn't matter. And right before the line cut out, he whispered one more thing. Something so quiet I almost missed it. They knew it was coming back for them. I was about to go live with the convoy reports when the emergency broadcast system failed. Not just for me, for everyone. Every radio tuned to an official channel heard the same thing. Dead air, followed by a burst of garbled static. Then silence. Then the metallic pulse we've been hearing all night. But louder, like something inside. The signal was waking up. I stayed live on my end, telling listeners to keep calling in, keep feeding me what they knew. But in every corner of the state, hell, maybe the whole country, the official channels were gone. Every automated alert, every local warning system, dead. Like the infrastructure itself chose silence over lies. The only thing that came through was a faint, looping signal buried under the static. A voice distorted beyond recognition, repeating coordinates over and over. Coordinates leading to the center of the state's largest wildlife reserve. Every time the coordinates repeated, the signal warped, like it was being dragged across time itself, something old and broken forcing its way through modern frequencies. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something alive inside the airwaves, something ancient enough to speak in signals, writing our technology like a parasite. I read the coordinates on air, told my listeners where they led. Some begged me to stop broadcasting them, like just hearing the numbers was an invitation. Others swore they heard words hidden beneath the numbers, a voice they couldn't fully understand, but somehow recognized in their bones. And just like that, the silence became the scariest part of all. The silence from official channels didn't last long. Nature hates a vacuum, and in the absence of truth, leaks pour in. At 2:47 a.m., a document hit my inbox. Anonymous sender, no subject line. Just a scanned memo from a government research facility stamped 6 months old. I read it once, then twice. And then I read it aloud. So every listener could hear the warnings no one wanted us to know. The memo is blunt, almost cold in its wording. It confirms that scientists working in advanced bioengineering detected unexpected reactions in genetically modified crops and livestock. DNA sequences from ancient species, samples that should have been inert, began showing reactivation signals when exposed to certain atmospheric conditions. The memo doesn't explain why the research team was splicing ancient DNA into modern agriculture in the first place. It doesn't need to. The point was clear. They knew. They knew something was waking up, and they knew the process was accelerating faster than their models predicted. Their own geneticists urged the project to shut down immediately, warning that ancient genetic material might retain environmental triggers, like instincts burned into the code itself. But instead of shutting it down, the memo was buried, marked as low priority noise, pushed aside for economic interests. Corporations had already invested billions into the new bioengineered crops, admitting that they might be reconstructing prehistoric ecosystems by accident. That would have triggered lawsuits big enough to crush nations. So they stayed quiet. And in that silence, the ancient code kept listening, waiting until the right signal finally called it back into existence. I finished reading the memo live on air, my voice shaking with something that wasn't just fear, it was rage. Because this wasn't a disaster. This was a deliberate silence. And silence is always the most dangerous sound. That's when the call came in. The line crackled, voice masked by distortion at first, like the caller was using every trick in the book to stay hidden. I thought it was another prank until the voice started shaking. "I worked there," the caller said. "Not at the farms, not in the labs you know about. I worked in the shadow facility underneath all that, the place where the real project lived." I asked what project they meant. The caller took a breath so long and shaky I thought the line would drop. They called it Project Dominion. It wasn't just about crops. It was about resurrection. They wanted to see if you could rebuild ecosystems from the DNA up, not just plants and animals, but everything. Complete food chains, including apex predators. The caller's breathing grew heavier, like they were reliving something they couldn't forget. It wasn't an accident. They wanted to see how far they could push it, how much ancient code could reassert itself. But the glitch, it wasn't in the DNA. It was in the airwaves. I froze. The frequencies we use, radio, satellite, even the wireless signals we pump into the atmosphere, somewhere in that noise, something ancient recognized the signal, like hearing a lullaby you haven't heard since birth. The room around me felt smaller, with every word they spoke. We didn't bring them back. We just reminded them how to find their way home. I asked who they were. The line hissed for a moment, and the voice whispered two words that didn't make sense, but felt right anyway. First ones. Before I could ask more, the caller's voice cracked. "They told us if this ever got out, we'd disappear too. But I can't stay quiet. You need to know, the radio waves aren't just broadcasting the story, they're feeding it." And just like that, the line went dead. But I knew they were still listening, because when the call ended, that metallic breathing sound was back, and this time, it was in perfect sync with my own. After the whistleblower's call, I knew we needed answers. Not from politicians, not from spokespeople, but from the people who actually knew what had been tampered with. So I reached out. Every scientist, biologist, geneticist, anyone who had ever touched this research. Most didn't respond. The ones who did, they were terrified. But one finally agreed to speak, live on air. Her name doesn't matter now, because she admitted she won't be alive much longer. What she told us was simple, but it shattered every assumption we had. This didn't start in the skies, or the oceans, or deep underground. It started in the soil, the fields beneath our feet. She explained how recent agricultural advancements relied on ancient DNA spliced into crops, sequences so old they predated mammals. Scientists wanted hardier plants, resistant to disease, capable of adapting to climate swings, but they didn't just borrow traits. They reawakened entire genetic memories, memories that didn't belong to plants alone. Ancient signals, environmental triggers burned into the very code of life itself, recognized something in the atmosphere. A shift caused by the same wireless frequencies we use to talk to each other. It's not evolution in reverse, she said. It's genetic recall. The land isn't becoming prehistoric again. It's remembering what it used to be. And as she spoke, I heard the strain in her voice. Not just fear of what had happened, but fear that this was only the beginning. The expert didn't hang up. She stayed on air, walking us deeper into the nightmare hidden in our own biology. She said it started with soil samples from ancient floodplains, where genetic material had been preserved under layers of sediment. Scientists believed these ancient sequences were harmless, just genetic fossils, too incomplete to trigger any biological activity. But they were wrong, because DNA isn't just a code. It's a language life remembers how to speak, even if it's been silent for millions of years. When those sequences were spliced into modern crops, they didn't just lay dormant, they listened. Every rainfall, every seasonal shift, every frequency pulse from communication, towers overhead acted like a tuning fork, vibrating those sequences back to awareness. At first, they just whispered inside the plants, altering growth rates, changing resistance profiles. But then, something resonated, unlocking sequences that didn't belong to plants at all. Because ancient soil didn't just hold plant DNA, it held fragments of ecosystems, predator and prey, plant and parasite, all encoded in a genetic memory so complete that when one piece woke up, it called for the others. That's why it wasn't just dinosaurs that came back. It was everything that remembered them, from microbes in the water to instincts buried in the air itself. DNA isn't just information, she said. It's a trigger, a key to a door no one remembered existed. And the worst part? That door wasn't locked from the outside. It was locked from within us. Our crops, our livestock, our ecosystems all carried shreds of the ancient world, waiting for the right frequency to call them home. She paused, voice thin as static. We didn't engineer dinosaurs back into existence. We reminded the earth it used to belong to them. That's when she hit us with the final piece, the part no one had even thought to fear. It wasn't just the plants or the atmosphere or the frequencies. It was the microbes, the tiny, ancient organisms frozen in amber, trapped in tar pits, buried in the gut bacteria of creatures that died before the first human ever walked upright. Those microbes carry time itself inside them, biological timestamps, genetic records of an era when dinosaurs ruled the earth, coded directly into their survival mechanisms. For millions of years, they lay dormant, waiting for conditions to match their memory. And modern science, greedy for shortcuts, gave them exactly that. The genetic experiments created perfect conditions for ancient microbes to reawaken. Environments with the same temperature, same chemical composition, same DNA, markers they hadn't seen since the Cretaceous. And when they woke, they did exactly what they were programmed to do, rebuild the only world they understood. They didn't just trigger plant mutations or bacterial shifts. They rewound entire ecosystems, microbes signaling to plants, plants signaling to predators, predators signaling to the air itself. That's why the dinosaurs came back intact, not as twisted hybrids or failed clones. They came back because the Earth itself remembered how to make them. It's not time travel, she said. It's time infection. The past didn't come to us. We called it into us. And the most terrifying part? Those microbes aren't done yet. They're still transmitting, still rebuilding, still searching for the final piece, the one apex predator that completed the ancient circle. She wouldn't say what that predator was, but I already knew, because I could hear it breathing through the static again, and this time it knew we were listening. The moment the scientists finished explaining how Earth had remembered itself, the phone lines lit up again. Only this time, the voices weren't asking for answers. They were offering them. Religious callers flooded the show, voices trembling but resolute. To them, this wasn't science gone wrong. This was judgment. They said Earth had always been a borrowed place, and the first ones were its rightful heirs. Humanity had simply held the lease too long, and now the original owners had come to collect. One caller read from ancient texts describing beasts of the earth returning in the final days, their footsteps shaking the ground, their roars splitting the sky. This isn't a glitch, they said. It's a reckoning. But right alongside them came the conspiracists. To them, none of this was divine. It was designed, a controlled reset, a population purge disguised as an accident. They claimed the government knew about the biological instability all along, that elite circles had been quietly preparing, building bunkers, hoarding technology that could survive prehistoric climates. One caller even claimed certain bloodlines had been genetically engineered to resist prehistoric pathogens, ensuring that only the right kind of survivors inherited the Earth. They swore this was a controlled extinction event, wiping the slate clean for a new class of human, designed not just to survive with the dinosaurs, but to rule beside them. Science calls it genetic collapse. Faith calls it the return of the true kingdom. Conspiracists call it a culling with a smile, but standing in the middle, caught between ancient prophecy and modern conspiracy, is everyone else. Just ordinary people, hiding in cellars, huddled in their cars, clutching kitchen knives and battery radios, listening to me. And in the silence between the theories, one fact lingers like a breath held too long. It doesn't matter if this was prophecy, accident, or design, because it's happening. After the chaos of calls, the scientists came back, but this time their voices sounded different, no longer detached, no longer clinging to the language of research and discovery. They spoke like mourners at their own funeral, because now they had to admit the one thing they'd avoided all night. There is no way to reverse the glitch. Not with medicine, not with containment, not with technology. The process isn't an infection you can cure. It's a fundamental rewrite of Earth's biological operating system. Ancient DNA has been reactivated across every ecosystem, entangling itself with modern biology at the deepest levels. Every living thing on this planet, from the grass underfoot to the bacteria in your gut, has been rewired to fit the ancient template. The only way to stop it would be to wipe the slate clean. Not just the dinosaurs, but everything evolved after them. A global biological purge, a self-inflicted extinction event. The scientists said it plainly, like the words hurt their mouths. The only way to stop the glitch is to unmake modern life. Reset the biosphere to zero. I asked if anyone had the stomach to push that button, to sacrifice humanity and every modern species to save the future of Earth itself. The scientist paused, then whispered, "There's already a team assigned to study that option." I don't know what scared me more. The idea that we'd choose extinction to fix our mistake, or the possibility that we won't even get the chance. Because outside the window, the roars are getting closer, and they don't sound like they're waiting for our decision. The phones have stopped ringing. Not because people stopped caring, but because they've realized no one's coming to save them. No cavalry, no cure, no turning back the clock. All that's left is the choice no one wanted to face. Do we fight for a future that doesn't belong to us anymore? A future where we adapt, where we learn to live alongside the predators we resurrected? Do we become prey again, scavenging in the shadows of ancient kings? Or do we take the other path, the one whispered about in buried memos and closed-door briefings, the path where humanity chooses to die on its own terms, triggering a biological purge that wipes every living thing post-Cretaceous off the board, ourselves included? Neither path offers salvation. One is survival through surrender, the other is extinction by choice. And in the silence between broadcasts, between breaths, between the low hum of the signal and the distant tremor of footsteps moving closer, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. We called them back, and now they decide whether we stay. We knew it wasn't just us. We knew this wasn't some isolated rupture, some genetic accident confined to a single coastline or a rogue lab. But hearing it, hearing their voices, not just from across the state, but from across the world, that's when it sank in. The emergency channels bled into our feed, frantic transmissions from every time zone. Japan, reporting pterosaurs darkening the skies over Tokyo Bay, wings blotting out the stars. In Brazil, whole port towns gone silent, their last messages describing ripples moving through the Amazon, too large, too fast, like the river itself was breathing. From Siberia to South Africa, they all said the same thing. The ancient ones came back everywhere at once, as if the earth itself flipped a switch. Some arrived from the air, some rose from jungles that should have held nothing but shadows, and others, God help them, climbed up from the ice. The signal from Australia cut in, their emergency broadcast collapsing mid-sentence as a roar swallowed the transmission. Not a single word from them since. We weren't first, we weren't alone, we were simply next, and with every new voice breaking through the static, the picture sharpened. This wasn't a regional disaster. This was the Earth resetting itself, continent by continent, replacing the world we built with the world it remembers. When the world realized the crisis had no borders, the borders closed anyway. Governments moved fast, some faster than others. Highways barricaded overnight, airports locked down, shipping lanes cut off. Cities became fortresses, checkpoints at every road leading in or out. Soldiers posted at the edges like human scarecrows. Inside the walls, people clung to routines as if work schedules and grocery runs could keep reality at bay. But outside those walls, the countryside was already being rewritten. Small towns abandoned, farmland surrendered, forests growing thicker and older by the hour, like evolution itself was running in reverse. Not every country built walls to keep the creatures out. Some built walls to keep their own people in. They knew that the real threat wasn't just outside. It was panic, hunger, collapse from within. But the fortresses didn't stop the roars, didn't stop the ground from shaking when something massive walked too close. They only delayed the inevitable, turning cities into glass jars where modern life flickered like a candle waiting for a breath to blow it out. In the end, the walls were a gesture, not a solution, because you can't fence out the past when the past has already made its home in the bones of the earth itself. When the walls failed to hold back the fear, faith rushed in to fill the gap. It started as whispers, small groups praying not for salvation, but for surrender. They said the dinosaurs weren't invaders. They were the original inheritors, Earth's first and only chosen species. And humanity's reign had always been a temporary loan. The whispers became sermons. In parts of South America, whole towns turned into temples, decorating their streets with fossil altars and burning offerings beneath Paleolithic symbols no archaeologist could trace. In parts of Asia, priests declared the dinosaurs to be the Earth's true gods, their return prophesied in ancient carvings once dismissed as myth. And then came the blood rituals. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, a group of cultists broke into a natural history museum, dragging ancient fossils into the streets and smearing them with their own blood, chanting that the first ones could only be appeased through human sacrifice. I played one of their chants live on air. Low, rhythmic, full of breath and bone, like a prayer whispered from a throat half filled with dirt. The words didn't match any language we speak today, but somehow they sounded familiar, like something buried deep in our own DNA remembered the sound. Some worshipped in fear, others in awe, but The message was the same. The first ones are back. The earth belongs to them. And if we kneel fast enough, maybe they'll let us stay. When fear settles, greed wakes up. It started small. Rumors from the southern border, whispers about fossils being dug up and sold like narcotics. But these weren't museum pieces. These were the bones that still remembered. Some said the fossils held residual genetic signatures, pieces of the ancient code that triggered the first glitch. Others claimed that the bones were conductive, able to amplify the same frequencies that called the dinosaurs back. It didn't matter if the science made sense. People believed. And when belief meets desperation, markets explode. Within days, black market channels were flooded with offers. Dinosaur teeth for sale, clawed fragments at a premium, entire fossilized skulls going for the price of a house. Buyers weren't just collectors or scientists. They were survivalists, cult leaders, and even governments gambling on the superstition that these bones were keys, either to control the dinosaurs or to become part of whatever came next. One trafficker called into the show, voice disguised, breathing fast like he was afraid something was already following him. He claimed the bones were still warm to the touch, as if the earth itself was rewriting them in real time, charging them like batteries. I asked him if it felt like holding history. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "No," he said. "It feels like holding a loaded gun, pointed at the world." And then the line went dead. Then came the pirate signal. It cut across the AM band without warning. A broadcast not from any official station, but from someone deep off-grid, transmitting from a place that no map names. The voice was masked, grainy, synthetic, but the message was clear enough to freeze my blood. They claimed to have found a second glitch, not accidental like the first, but intentional, something buried deep in the same ancient code, a failsafe written into Earth's memory, a way to force a second reset, trigger it, and the dinosaurs would vanish. Every last one, but so would everything evolved after them. Modern forests, oceans, insects, mammals, gone in hours, replaced by whatever DNA came before. A rollback not just to the age of dinosaurs, but to the point where the Earth itself chooses its own successors. They said the choice was simple: erase ourselves to erase them, or adapt to live beside monsters that remember we were never meant to exist. The pirate broadcast played for exactly 7 minutes, then cut to silence. No station ID, no coordinates, no way to trace it. But before it vanished, the voice said one last thing. "This is not a warning. This is an offer." And somewhere, beneath the static, I swear I heard something ancient breathing, waiting for us to decide. The pirate broadcast had barely faded when another leak hit my inbox, this time from a source with credentials I couldn't ignore. A veteran investigative journalist, someone who spent decades peeling back government lies like rotting wallpaper, attached a folder of internal memos from the world's biggest biotech firms. These weren't theories. These were receipts. 6 months before the first sighting, before the first roar shook the air. The companies were warned. Internal researchers flagged an anomaly in their gene splicing programs, something buried deep in the ancient DNA sequences they were implanting into crops and livestock. The DNA wasn't just replicating, it was remembering. The genetic strands were behaving like living fossils, waking up triggers that had no business existing in modern biology. Fossilized instincts, predator-prey signaling systems, even environmental memory, all encoded in ancient sequences no one fully understood. The warning memos made one thing crystal clear: if these sequences achieve cross-species integration, the result may be irreversible reactivation of prehistoric ecological structures. In plain English, if the glitch started, the Earth wouldn't stop until it was ancient again. The corporations had two choices: halt the research entirely, or bury the warnings under paperwork and profit projections. You already know which one they chose. I read those warnings live on air, voice shaking with something halfway between rage and fear, not because they made a mistake, but because they knew. They knew the price and they paid it anyway. But corporate greed wasn't the whole story. The next document in the leak came from the Department of Defense. Buried in classified briefings was the real reason the research never stopped, even after the warnings. Because the glitch wasn't just a scientific accident, it was a military investment. Deep inside the Resurrection Project, certain factions saw prehistoric life not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Biological weapons that didn't need programming, training, or loyalty. Predators that knew nothing of borders, alliances, or treaties. Creatures built not just for survival, but for domination. The leaked documents described war games on a scale humanity was never meant to play. Scenarios where dinosaurs were unleashed not as accidents, but as tactical assets, used to clear enemy territory faster than bombs or drones ever could. Some factions argued for controlled breeding programs, dinosaurs engineered with built-in kill switches, designed to recognize certain pheromones or radio signals as commands. Others wanted full ecosystem reboots, entire hostile regions reset to primordial wilderness, where only the strongest and best armed could survive. The glitch wasn't a failure, it was a proof of concept. But the moment they flipped the switch, they realized the truth. You can't leash the past. And once it remembers its place at the top, it doesn't share. The final document was the one that made my stomach turn, because it confirmed something even the conspiracy theorists hadn't guessed. The resurrection didn't start in the labs, it started in the sky. Satellite records showed targeted genetic payloads broadcast into the upper atmosphere, sequences stitched into aerosol dispersion programs under the guise of climate engineering experiments. Officially, they were testing ways to improve crop resilience through atmospheric nutrient diffusion. Unofficially, they were seeding the sky with fragments of ancient life, turning Earth's own atmosphere into a global petri dish. The plan was to trigger slow, manageable ecological drift. Let the ancient genes influence modern species over decades, long enough for humanity to adapt alongside the changes. But the atmosphere didn't follow the script. Instead of slow drift, something triggered a chain reaction. A perfect storm of environmental conditions, electromagnetic interference, and ancient microbial signals that had been waiting millions of years for the right whisper to wake them up. The atmosphere became a womb, and the Earth became a time machine, rebuilding not just dinosaurs, but the entire prehistoric operating system. It wasn't nature clawing its way back. It was deliberate resurrection, fired into the sky like a gunshot, aimed at the future we were too arrogant to protect. And now the atmosphere remembers what we forgot. As the pieces came together, the leaked memos, the military agendas, the skyborne resurrection, I started to wonder, how could something this catastrophic stay buried for so long? How could so many people look the other way? Then I found my answer, and it was worse than greed. It was belief, buried in internal communications, emails, transcripts, unredacted field reports, was evidence of a sect within the scientific community itself, a cult that had nested inside the research from the very beginning. They called themselves the keepers of the true rulers, and their doctrine was simple. Dinosaurs were Earth's rightful kings, its first and only intended masters. Humanity, they believed, was an evolutionary mistake, a glitch of its own, a fragile offshoot that only survived because the first ones were asleep. They didn't want to stop the glitch. They wanted to complete it. The cult existed across labs, universities, even inside government panels. Scientists who believed their work wasn't about advancing human knowledge, but about correcting Earth's mistake by waking its original rulers. Some of them even believed they could serve the first ones, become something like priests to the ancient order, translating our species into something that could survive under the new regime. The cult didn't infiltrate the system. They built it from the ground up. And as I read their words aloud, prayers disguised as scientific notes, genetic work framed as religious offerings, one thing became clear. This wasn't a collision between science and faith. It was a marriage. That was when it hit me. The final piece, the connection I should have seen from the beginning. The glitch wasn't just triggered by ancient DNA. It wasn't just unlocked by the atmosphere or accelerated by environmental drift. It was amplified by us, by radio. Every frequency we've broadcasted, every emergency alert, every call-in show, every panicked voice cutting through static. It wasn't just information. It was fuel. The ancient DNA sequences were listening, tuned to frequencies older than speech, waiting for signals that matched patterns encoded millions of years ago. Radio didn't just spread the news, it spread the resurrection itself, carrying prehistoric signals back into the environment like a beacon calling them home. And that meant this broadcast, my broadcast, was part of the problem. Every word I spoke, every terrified caller I answered, every minute I stayed live, I wasn't just documenting the apocalypse. I was accelerating it. I'm not just reporting the glitch, I'm feeding it. My hands were shaking when I said it out loud because there was no way to know how much damage I'd already done. How many ancient receptors had picked up my voice and heard a welcome signal. The studio was quiet for the first time all night, except for the faint hum beneath the static. A hum I realized was perfectly timed to my own breathing. The first ones weren't just out there. They were on the line, listening, waiting. And the only way to stop it would be to fall silent. I don't know how much longer this broadcast will hold. The lights have been flickering for nearly an hour, the equipment humming like it's straining to keep up with the weight of the signal. The emergency backup generator cycles between life and death, and every time the power dips, the static changes. The pulse underneath it deepens, like something is pushing through. But it's not the failing technology that makes my hands shake. It's what I can hear outside. Every time the power fades, the insulation between inside and out seems to thin. The walls carry low vibrations, not from thunder, not from distant explosions, but from something moving, something big enough to make the building breathe with it. I can't see them, but I don't need to. The calls already told me what's out there. Creatures that shouldn't exist. Scaled relics with muscle memory older than language, circling closer to the signal, like sharks drawn to blood in the water. The radio waves themselves are bait, and the station, it's a beacon, one we've been lighting all night long. I don't know if they understand the broadcast, but I know they feel it. The frequency hum, the vibrations, the ancient biological signals we accidentally resurrected when we started broadcasting over frequencies they were born knowing. This isn't technology to them. This is instinct, and now they're following it home. The power dips again. I hear a crack, like metal under stress. Something just brushed the tower, or something bigger is testing the walls. I should go silent, but I can't. Because even as the monsters close in, the phones are still ringing. And someone needs to hear these last voices before they disappear. I don't screen the calls anymore. There's no time, no need. Every line that connects is someone calling for the last time. And you can hear it in their voices. There's no more screaming, no more frantic demands for updates, just resignation, the sound of people who've made peace with being forgotten. A father whispers from his attic, voice trembling but calm. He says his daughters are asleep beside him, tucked under a pile of blankets, dreaming through their last night. He asked me to say their names on air, so someone remembers they were here. A woman calls from her car, her windshield shattered, her headlights casting light on something too large to describe just standing in the road ahead. She doesn't scream. She just breathes into the phone and says, "Tell them we saw the end, and it was beautiful." Then comes the teenager, voice cracking under the weight of too much reality, calling from a basement where he's hiding with his little brother. They ran out of food yesterday. They can hear something breathing through the vents, low and slow, like the earth itself is dreaming them away. He asks if I think heaven will still take people. Who woke the monsters up? I lie to him. I say yes. I say of course. And when his call drops, the silence it leaves feels like a funeral by itself. One by one, the calls slow until there's only one line left open. A voice I know. The woman who's been calling since the first hour. The one who swore she saw something walking beside the dinosaurs, something shaped like us but older. Her voice is different now, soft, almost reverent. They're not here to kill us, she says. They're here to take back what's theirs. The line cuts. The static hums. And outside the station, the breathing gets louder. I always thought there would be a line, a thin strip of separation between the story and the storyteller, a kind of shield that came with the microphone, the walls of the booth, the illusion that a voice can float above the chaos instead of drowning in it. That line is gone. I'm no longer the voice covering the disaster. I'm inside it, part of the breaking, part of the broadcast that feeds the thing killing us. Every word I say pulls them closer. Every terrified caller, every emergency bulletin, every breath through this microphone is a flare shot into the sky, telling the past exactly where to find the present. I'm not reporting anymore. I'm buying time. For you, for me, for anyone still listening. Every second I hold this mic, I keep the silence from swallowing what's left of us. I've barricaded the door. It won't hold. I use chairs, a desk, a shelf ripped from the wall. My hands are bleeding from splinters and panic. The signal's still hot, but the hum behind the broadcast has changed. Deeper now, almost like the station itself is learning to speak the old language. I could stop talking. Maybe if I kill the broadcast, they'll drift somewhere else. Maybe they'll forget I'm here. But that's the lie we keep telling ourselves, isn't it? That silence will save us. It won't, because this isn't about sound. It's about recognition. They know I exist now. They know all of us exist, and they remember what we did to their world. I can see the red light on the console, the one that means we're still live, and I realize I'm not just the broadcaster anymore. I'm the final caller, the one who gets to describe what's happening from the inside, right until the signal cuts. The first impact shook the walls so hard, the transmitter blinked out for 5 seconds. Long enough for me to think this was it, that the story ended there. But the power surged back, just in time for the second impact. Something big, something ancient, testing the walls like they were nothing more than skin stretched too thin. I called out on air, voice cracking, asked if anyone was still listening. A few texts flashed on the monitor, survivors begging for updates I no longer had. All I could offer was the sound of my own fear. The third impact broke the window behind me, shards crashing onto the console, and that's when I heard it. The breathing I'd only ever played secondhand, through callers' phones and distant recordings. But now, it was in the room. I didn't stop talking, even as my hands fumbled for the door, even as my feet stumbled over cables and paper and everything that used to make this a place of stories instead of a place to die. I didn't stop talking, because you have to hear this. You have to know how it ends. The roar filled the space, so loud the speakers clipped into static, so low I felt my ribs tremble inside me. Something heavy smashed into the barricade, a chair splintering, the shelf skidding across the floor. I begged the audience, if you can still hear me, remember us, remember we were here. Something clawed at the door, wood and bone arguing over who belonged more. I backed toward the console, hands on the controls, even as the door gave way. Because if this was the last sound I ever made, I wanted the world to hear it. the breath of something ancient, mixing with the breath of something dying. The roar that swallowed the station wasn't just the end of my broadcast. It was the past announcing itself, loud enough to silence everything that came after. The console sparked, the transmitter cracked, and my voice, your voice, our voices finally became part of the static. The signal didn't die. It just changed. Now, somewhere inside the noise, we are what the past listens to, and somewhere in the silence between roars, we are what the earth remembers. For the first time all night, the broadcast dies. No warning, no farewell, just silence. The kind that hums inside your skull. The kind that feels too heavy to be empty. I sit here staring at the console, hands shaking, waiting for it to come back. Because if the signal is gone, that means I'm already gone too. Swallowed whole like every caller, every town, every name I read on air. But then, something replaces the silence. A sound. Not static. Not human. Not anything made by us. It's a roar, but not the ones we've played all night. Not the ones caught on grainy phone recordings or broadcast from trembling reporters in dying cities. This one is bigger, older, so deep it doesn't just hit your ears. It moves through your bones, like the ground itself is remembering who it used to belong to. It holds for a full minute, rising and falling like breath inside a lung, too large to belong to one creature alone. It's layered, something primal, wrapped around something else, a shape inside a sound, like language never meant for human ears. It doesn't end clean. It doesn't fade. It just stops, leaving the silence even heavier than before. Like the world itself paused to listen. And in that pause, you wonder, was that a warning? Or was it a welcome home? When the roar fades, the broadcast doesn't come back. Instead, the emergency system takes over, but not with any official message, not with evacuation orders or pleas for calm. It's a single phrase, whispered through layers of static, endlessly looping like a pulse in a dying machine. This is not the end. This is the restart. The voice doesn't belong to anyone I know. Not a host, not a reporter, not even the automated system itself. It sounds ancient and new at the same time, like someone, or something, has found our language, learned just enough to say exactly what we need to hear. This is not the end. This is the restart. The loop plays whether you turn the dial or cut the power. It follows you into silence, threading through the air like the earth itself is whispering. The broadcast is gone, but the signal belongs to them now. If you're still listening, if you can still hear me, then maybe there's hope. Or maybe you're just hearing what they want you to hear. Either way, you and I, we've both been part of something no one will ever believe, not because it's impossible, but because some memories are too dangerous to survive. We've spent all night sending signals into the dark, hoping someone would answer. But what if the only ones listening were the ones we tried to forget? What if this wasn't an invasion, but a memory surfacing after millions of years of silence? Now it's your turn to answer a question, one I can't get out of my head. If the earth could remember us, would it even want to? Let me know what you think in the comments, because the story doesn't end when the signal fades. It lives in every conversation we refuse to have. Subscribe if you want more broadcasts like this, but be careful what you ask for. Sometimes the past doesn't need an invitation, just a voice willing to say its name out loud. And before you go, share this broadcast with someone you care about, because memories are only safe if they're shared. And once they're forgotten, they tend to come back hungry. This is VoiceCast, signing off if there's anyone left to sign off to.